I was a bit sort of looking at the marketing space, seeing how tech companies with massive budgets are being crushed by, an 18-year-old in a bedroom. I see a lot of people automating too early and trying to automate too big of a scope. Do processes manually first, but then the next step is document those processes. When I talk about an AI workflow, that might be something that has like a text classification step. Most underrated aspect of AI automation is you don't need an AI agent for a lot of AI value.
Okay, cool. Max, thanks a lot for doing this, by the way.
Oh, my pleasure, Yusuf. I'm really excited to be here.
Really cool. Today we'll talk about AI automation in the future of n8n workflows, and we have an expert on the show today. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction? Who are you in the first place? What have you been working on the last 4 to 5 years? And what are you doing at n8n?
Sure. So I'm Tkacz, and I joined n8n as employee 3 or 4. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm a day one at n8n for the last 5 years. And I joined as our head of design. And for the first couple of years at n8n, that's what I focused on building a really high quality product, I'd like to think. And it's funny, when I applied at n8n, we weren't hiring for designer, but it had just come out on Product Hunt. And I remember understanding, I got sort of this aha moment immediately after looking at the product, but realizing that the UX wasn't quite there. So I felt that I could, actually contribute in a way. And so after some back and forth with Jan, our CEO, I kind of convinced him to take me on. And then since then, was working on building out that product. It's been a wild ride, so many learnings. This was sort of really my first taste of going from, seed through the different stages to sort of scaling out. And then in the last year, I sort of realized that there's such a story to tell with our users. I was a bit sort of looking at the marketing space, seeing how, tech companies with massive budgets are being crushed by, an 18-year-old in a bedroom. I thought to myself, we must be able to iterate on this. And then my hypothesis basically was that we could tell the stories of our community members that would inspire me in my job as a product designer. So that's what I've been doing as a senior developer advocate for n8n for about the last 8-9 months formally.
Very cool. I mean, if you do a keyword volume analysis or search, you see that n8n is going through the roof, right, compared to Zapier and all these other tools like Make, which, by the way, they're amazing tools. I'm also using them for my business and for clients as well. But somehow n8n has this kind of nice networking effect for some reason. Can you explain why n8n gained so much of a popularity in the last months?
Sure. So I think there's a series of different effects that are kind of creating this flywheel to where we are today. We have some theories. I think some of them are validated. The one thing I would say is market timing definitely helps. But I think what we've focused on at n8n since the beginning is community and being really authentic in that, investing in our users, listening to them. And I think that's created, firstly, a critical mass of people around the world that respect our product, know our product, and advocate for it. So for the first 3.5 years, I think word of mouth was still the main driver of n8n. That really helped. And then when LangChain came out, so if you're not familiar with LangChain, it's a framework for building with AI. But when we integrated that into n8n, I think we were really early into doing that in a low-code way, in a visual way. Mm-hmm. But we didn't abstract it away so much to where it was still powerful enough. And then around last year in 2024, there was a lot of a hype cycle around AI. I was in the crypto space. I think the one difference with that hype cycle is there was some hype, but there was also tangible benefit being seen. I think a lot of people in 2024 were realizing that they need to understand this technology better. And then the LLMs started recommending us as well. Around 2024, when there was some of these foundation model LLM updates, we started getting ranked there. I believe that's the word of mouth. On Reddit and on Facebook and on all these different just channels, just a critical mass of text talking about us. So we had the AI agent building experience, I think that was high quality, that was accessible enough for a lot of people, but it was technical enough to do powerful things. We then had the community to kind of grow that flywheel. And then I think just as a product and marketing function and GTM function, we just executed really well once we started getting those eyeballs and that attention, listening to users, shipping features rapidly, sometimes having something out in a week if we saw that it was important. As you know, in the AI space, those things dropping all the time. Listening to our users, and then really doubling down on content. We saw very quickly that YouTube content was becoming very big for us. We invested heavily in that. Big focus of mine is that and not just our own content, empowering our community creators to help them grow, because we fundamentally believe that they, on the edge, can explain n8n the best in their vertical. I think that's the case for a lot of complicated products. And then, that all together, all those forces, the flywheel and a bit of luck, I think brought us to where we are today.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I'm wondering from because you mentioned the content pieces that are being generated on YouTube and all these other social platforms, I'm wondering what differentiates in your eyes, Max, a good workflow from a bad workflow that people are putting out there?
Sure. I think it first starts out in how you message the workflow. In most hype cycles, which we do have one in AI right now, you'll have a lot of actors enter that space and see that there's an opportunity to let's say a lot of engagement, a lot of likes, whatever your goal is. And then they start giving false promises, right? So when you start seeing something like this workflow can do everything, that's probably already a bad workflow, because the promise of the workflow and then when it does are incompatible, right? That's at a meta level. I would say when we get into actually sort of on the technical side, the biggest thing that differentiates a good workflow and a bad workflow is a bad workflow assumes that the happy path will happen, assumes that everything goes right. If you're thinking about production, and not just for a business critical, mission critical use case, but steps can fail. And for example, in n8n, there's lots of different strategies and functionality that you could plan for a step to fail, have it fail gracefully, give feedback to the user, retry. And I think that's the case even more with AI steps, with LLMs that are probabilistic. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is having fault tolerance and assuming that things could go wrong, just like a developer does when they're building software, and ensuring that that's taken into account. And that might be, someone having an alert on something going wrong. That could be self-healing, self-fixing. But it's assuming that the world has entropy, that the APIs that you might ping don't work. I think a really eye-opening thing to me, as a wide-eyed university student, I would assume that Google's uptime is 99.9999999%. And even if that's the case, I remember early at n8n, I did a test where I was pinging a Google Sheet once a minute over 24 hours, and the next morning I forget what it was, but over 40 of those calls failed. So even with a reliable service like Google Sheets, assume that call might fail.
I see. Maybe also, I see a lot of content maybe assuming that something is an automation or an AI agent, where in fact it's actually not. Can you maybe quickly give us in your terms, Max, the differentiation between an automation, an AI automation, and an AI agent?
Sure. So the way I like to think of it is I bucket it into 3 different buckets. So we have a traditional workflow, let's say. To be honest, I don't think that's the best name. I'm sure in hindsight, some smart folks will come up with a good name. But we have a traditional workflow, and I'll define these in a moment. We have in the middle what I call agentic workflows. And then on the right side, we would have an AI agent. So a traditional workflow is deterministic. Let's say you have a webhook, an if node step that checks some of that webhook data, and then maybe it routes it to a code step. Maybe down here, we're sending a Slack message. That's deterministic. Given the same input, the expected output is always the same, right? Now, when we get to an agentic workflow, we have elements of that. So maybe there's still a webhook coming in. Maybe we still have that if node. But then we're going to get to an agentic step. Now, the root word there is agency. So that could be an AI agent. And what that basically means, I think there's a few different definitions going around. But I think the most important thing is that an AI agent, for example, is assigned a task. It has a goal, a completion goal. And it's allowed to think over multiple steps. Some of those thoughts could be actions. It could decide to use a tool that it has access to access memory that it has access to get more context. And it can perform multiple steps of thinking or actions and then decide that it's finished, that it's completed the task, or that it's reached some sort of maximum number of steps and output. So it's non-deterministic. It might decide to search with a certain query tool that you have 2-3 times. And then if you run it again, it might search 3-4 times because there's a probabilistic curve of what's happening here. So an agentic workflow is a hybrid between a traditional workflow that's deterministic and then these agentic steps. And then an AI agent essentially just takes that all the way. The AI agent has a task. And let's say a chatbot is a great example of one, although there's lots of different ways that you can interact with an AI agent. It's assigned that task. Maybe it's a user message, or maybe it comes in programmatically, but then it uses the different tools and its capabilities to think through that problem, come up with a game plan how to solve that task, and completes that task. And I think depending who you ask, it's that definition of how autonomous does it have to be, where someone's going to say, oh, this is an AI agent or this is a workflow. And I think we're seeing that in the space right now. A lot of people are sort of being accused of saying, hey, look, this is a workflow. This is an agentic workflow. It's not an AI agent. I think there's a continuum. I think those definitions and those goalposts will change a bit over time. And I think the most important thing there is not, do I have an AI agent? Do I have an agentic workflow? It's like, am I choosing the right step for the job, basically?
All right. One question I have, Max, for you is, when does it actually make sense to define an automation use case? Because some people want to automate stuff just for the sake of automating it, or using AI agents just to use an AI agent so they can feel great and good about themselves. So when do you think is the right time to automate something and maybe use an AI agent?
That's a really good question, Yusuf, because I see this coming up a lot. And my answer is predicated on, if you're learning and you would like to learn this technology, and I recommend for a lot of us and a lot of our roles, it's helpful to know this technology. It's okay to automate for automate's sake if the goal is to learn, because a lot of us are inductive learners, and that's a great way to learn. If we're talking about, I'm in my role, I want to have ROI on the time that I spend, I see a lot of people automating too early and trying to automate too big of a scope. My recommendations for folks, and one great way to get into sort of a muscle on this, is to keep an automation log. 5 years in, I see a lot more automation potential naturally when I'm looking at a process. I do think it's a muscle that you grow over time. So know that whatever your muscles today, it will get better. But do processes manually first. It's probably already your status quo today. But then the next step is document those processes. The organizations that we see when they set up n8n and they're starting with automation and bringing AI automation into it, the organizations that understand their processes, that have defined processes, have a much better head start. So you have to know what that process is. And then you can start to look at the different chunks of that process. And you can put on a project management hat. Something project managers do, and project managers is an effort to impact analysis, right? So it doesn't have to be very formal, but if you look at, there's maybe 3 discrete chunks of a process, maybe this one is very easy to automate and actually takes 4 hours for a human. And maybe this one's very hard and takes 15 minutes. That's obviously a very easy comparison to pick, but there you would pick that first part to automate and then go step by step. And I think the biggest thing to remember is the end goal isn't to have a big fancy workflow. The end goal is most of the time to solve a human's time. It might be reducing time to lead, for example, but understand what is that metric that you're trying to improve, and have that lens after you've modeled your process to understand what to automate first. So start small and understand the process that you're automating. This is particularly true if you're automating a process for someone else. If you're doing it for yourself, you're going to have a lot more inherent context on that issue, so you might not have to do that as formally. But if you're automating for someone else, have a curious mind. And in fact, I would say a lot of the skill sets that product managers have in understanding people's problems and their jobs to be done, or the tasks, there's lots of frameworks around this. That could be also a good step, is watch a few, PM 101 research sort of videos or something like that to understand some of that skill set, because that's going to be really helpful there as well.
Super helpful, Max. What would you say are some of the common challenges then when implementing AI-driven automation or AI agents in maybe an existing workflow, or maybe something that hasn't been automated yet?
I think the biggest challenge is understanding that these systems are probabilistic, right? So as I said before, input comes in, the same input. Are you going to get a range of responses? And for most use cases, if you look at that sort of bell curve, this is good and this is not good, right? So it's understanding, what do we do here? How acceptable is this? And at what point are we introducing some other strategy, like human in the loop, or going off to some deterministic flow, or sort of segmenting out? That, I would say, is one of the biggest challenges. Now, there's lots of strategies and whatnot to do that, or to account for that and mitigate that. But I would say that's the biggest one, is to understand that there will be a probabilistic curve, and that curve will get tighter over time, right? So like, with each model that comes out, that curve is probably narrowing and narrowing and narrowing to where for a lot of use cases, you probably don't even have to think about that curve in future. But if you're thinking about production, if you're thinking about things that are mission critical, if you have SLAs and stuff on this process, you need to understand that there will be a failure rate. And I think the biggest thing there that I would tell folks is, well, one thing that we do when I'm looking at a workflow is doing the sanity check. Why do I need AI here? It will be more expensive on average versus just a code function executing. It's got that probabilistic sort of output issue. And then it's also going to be a lot slower, right? As soon as you add an LLM in the mix, pre-LLM workflows, very often you judge in maybe milliseconds, sometimes maybe seconds. If an LLM is in the mix, we are most likely going to be talking about seconds unless you're a very advanced actor. But then this is probably not so relevant for you because you probably know a lot more than me about that already. So those would be, I think, one of the biggest challenges I see going in.
What are some of the most exciting use cases, Max, that you have been working on when it comes to just simple automation, simple quote unquote, and AI agents that you have seen, or maybe the community has built?
So when it comes to prod, I'm seeing a lot of AI workflows or workflows that have AI in it. I'm seeing some agentic workflows as well, but there is a separation there. So when I talk about an AI workflow, that might be something that has like a text classification step. That's not an agentic step. It is an AI step though. So generally, if we look at the AI bucket, let's see, in customer service, I think that is one of the biggest areas where we're seeing sort of bigger clients as well going to prod real fast. So we have a customer that's, for example, handling about half of their tickets with an AI generated response. Now, when I see strategies like that, let's say for customer service, but this is applicable to a lot of others, I would say what they did is they understood the buckets of questions that they're getting. Then they picked the biggest bucket and the simplest bucket, that effort to impact ratio, and they automated that. They added some evaluations on top. They saw that was working, and then they moved on to those other sections. So that's actually a great example of that framework I was talking about on when to automate. Another one in customer service is also just tagging incoming tickets. I actually just did this with n8n's team themselves. So a new ticket comes in, and you might have 30 to 60 tags that you have to remember what they all mean and tag. The issue there as well, of course, is you've got new team members joining. People can be subjective on those tags as well. So we pretty quickly actually released that auto tagging for that. And week on week, it's getting a lot better as they're providing evaluation sort of feedback on it to improve it. But that one is another one I'm seeing as popular, I think, because it's not mission critical. And I advise for a lot of organizations, that's a great way to start. So you can turn it on. And if it's not 100% correct, things don't break down as much. But those are two big ones that I'm seeing in customer service. I would say in sales, obviously, if you're a profit center in your organization and something can save you time, there's a lot of budget for that, and there's a lot of need. And I think with sales, there's a lot of doing research for the salesperson. Obviously, like having a hyper-personalized approach, understanding someone's business, understanding their competitors and everything really helps. And I think I'm seeing some customers building out sort of research pipelines and tools and co-pilots and this kind of stuff that help their sales folks have better intelligence when they're talking with people, perhaps even live sometimes. I saw one customer working on sort of listening to the sort of transcript of the call live and providing potential like battle cards and stuff as that's happening live, using a RAG as a source of all the information they've had of every call and generating a dynamic information that could be relevant to close the deal in that scenario. I think that's really cool because it still has like the salesperson in the loop as the expert, but they're able to use that information. Around sales, there's a ton around then like aggregating insights that happen in calls. So Gong and all these other tools have some capabilities around that, but we see a lot of users having custom needs around that. We ourselves built CallForge, so that actually extracts all of our n8n's Gong calls and all this kind of stuff and creates this basically mega database of insights for the sales team and other teams to tap into. And then another big one that I'm seeing is in IT ops and SecOps. So in those roles, a lot of what folks need to do is monitor for alerts. You've got various different systems, sometimes sending in thousands of alerts, and they're using AI to help see through that noise. So that could be triaging some of these alerts, or in some IT ops, you might be referencing the MITRE ATT&CK database, which is a database of all these sort of different exploits and whatnot. It's using retrieval augmented generation to understand relevant MITRE ATT&CK documents and placing those there. So basically adding more context and filtering through the noise so that humans can get through those thousands of alerts and not miss important ones. But truly, that's just like a really small slice. I would say on the agentic side, I'm seeing a lot around like proposal writing, things around customer service, basically any time where you need to interact with multiple different tools. Another one for AI agents, I would say, as an overall bucket across verticals, is definitely just research, right? There's a lot of high quality tool sources for research, like Perplexity and whatnot. If you combine those with your own proprietary sources, like your own Notion and stuff, you can get some, I think, really interesting results, be it you're in like product, marketing, sales, IT. So definitely a lot around research as well.
I see. How much is MCPs being used?
Mm-hmm. So it's funny you should say that, because on Monday I was answering about like 25 messages from our community. It's like, when's the native MCP node coming? In the n8n community, I think the really cool thing is that we have community nodes. So we have had some community members that beat us to the punch on making an MCP node. For a little context on that, we are working on an implementation that's going to be like a bit more robust, so it will take a bit more time to come out. But yeah, there's a lot of interest around MCP and n8n right now. I think a lot of folks at n8n and in the community are sort of figuring out what that looks like. The first thing that is going to come out is the ability to use MCP clients. So n8n is consuming other MCP clients basically as tools. But we see a lot of exciting stuff around n8n being an MCP server as well. That's a bit more complicated. I myself, to be honest, I'm also still getting my head around MCP. We've had a lot of growth lately, so I was helping out with some of the team. But I would say there's probably going to be a much clearer answer on what that looks like in 30 days. But I can say just this week, I was in a sort of a strategic meeting about, okay, how are we engaging with MCP and interacting with it? Because I think generally I'm very supportive of protocols that allow AIs to talk with each other, because I think we're going to just need a lot of that for a lot of the utility that's going to be asked for in the coming years.
That's super interesting. I'm thinking about the low-code approach, maybe taking a step back. Who is the low-code approach actually for? Because obviously there's a lot of techies and out there that maybe don't want to use the low-code approach, but at the same time, I feel like n8n is this low-code environment where still you have the ability to be very deeply technical. So how did you manage to do that? I mean, this is obviously a big task to have something low code, but then being able to tap into kind of the technicalities of nodes, for example. Would you say it's for all ranges of technical users, or maybe people who are also not so familiar with how to use, I don't know, a workflow or automation? Or what do you say is the perfect like niche group or target group that you're targeting?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Quite a long question, I know.
No, that does make sense. I think my answer would have also been different a couple of years ago. I think one thing that's going to change with my answer with all these co-pilots and GPTs and people using them thoughtfully, whatever I'm going to say, the group of people that can be considered technical, I think has expanded because you can have assistants to fill in those gaps. But I think we've thought about this a lot at n8n. And the first thing is we focused on technical people, I think, from day one. We saw in the market that so much of automation is basically like, you don't need to code. You don't need to know anything. You just have it done automatically. But that messaging doesn't work for someone that spent their whole adult life learning a really valuable skill, which is coding, for example. So one of our personae is a developer, and we want to make sure that they're happy in n8n. We want to make sure that there's paradigms that make sense to them. There's some sort of one-to-oneness from some of their code paradigms, some of the things that they expect. That's one. But I would say the biggest sort of growing user is they're technical. Maybe they code in the past. Maybe they have a bit of sort of 101 code knowledge, but they're not day-to-day developers. Because I think those people get an aha moment on what they could do with n8n that they didn't think they could do. I think for a lot of developers, they see, well, okay, I can move 10, 50 times faster. And 50 is not a hyperbole. We do have some examples of that. But they're still getting something done that they could already do. But both of those personae, I think, have been really important to us because there's sort of a loop between them. And in a lot of technical environments, you very often have engineers working with semi-technical individuals on something. So both of those parties being happy working in the ecosystem is important. I think the other thing for us, and to what I said sort of at the beginning of this answer is that is changing, right? With co-pilots, and there's plenty of n8n users that are using our own AI assistant in n8n, plenty of users using Claude or even Cursor, sort of app mentioning some of the n8n code base and generating that step or generating code. I think what really helps as well, because we're growing and because the foundation models have sort of had some updates lately, foundation models like Claude and newer GPTs are also aware of some of n8n docs and stuff. So you're getting a lot better answers out of the box when you're asking a GPT to do, let's say, like a code step or something that you don't know how to do in n8n. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, Max, when it comes to emerging trends, do you see kind of key trends shaping the future of AI and automation? Obviously, it's kind of a cliche question, I should say, because it's very hard to predict. Things change weekly on a weekly basis. So what would you say are some of the trends that we're seeing at the moment? Now with MCP, what is going to be maybe next week or
Sure.
probably hard to tell.
Yeah. So at a very high level, I think in the short term, when you hear AI agent, people are most likely going to be talking about agentic workflows. And the reason for that is, I forget who was saying it. It was a really smart thing. So this isn't my original idea, but when we were talking about that probabilistic curve, right? Most tasks are multi-step. And that's the whole point of an AI agent. If it did one step, it wouldn't be an AI agent. It has to do multiple steps. Now, if each step, let's say, has a 75% success rate because of that probabilistic curve, 75% multiplied by 75% multiplied by 75% is not 75%. I'm not a mathematician, right? But it's 0.75 times point, right? But it's a lower percentage. And obviously, more valuable tasks, more complex tasks that, at a certain logical conclusion, that's a 0% probability, right? Now we can have human in the loop that can kind of reset that, right? A human can check it, it's good input. So then we're back to sort of 80%. But we're going to see these models get more effective on tightening that curve, right? So that 80% will come 90, maybe 99.9 for certain use cases. So we're going to see a lot more agency, I think, in the solutions that we dub as AI. We're going to see a lot more, if before you might have 2, 3 human in the loops to do a step, it might just be a human check right at the end for something really important, or no human at all for something that's less critical. So I definitely think we'll see a lot more agency, a lot more complex tasks being able to be done. And then when it comes to generative AI, I think the question is not if AI is going to be generating things like workflows or automated processes, it's when, to what degree. And I think at n8n, we acknowledge that is where things are going to move. We are working on text to workflow, for example. That's something we're working on right now. And what we really see the benefit of something like a workflow canvas in a text to workflow future is observability and transparency. Maybe you'll be able to describe a very complex process in a few sentences, and it'll model it out. But a lot of folks, even with high predictability, are still going to need to, either for compliance or just sort of good engineering, go into that process, check it, say, okay, good, this is going to work as expected, and be able to activate that with confidence.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, really cool, Max. I'm wondering, what are some of the areas or maybe niches where you think agents might become very useful in the future? And how will, for example, the job description of people, for example, engineers or prompt engineers, or just, I don't know, normal secretary might change in the future when it comes to AI agents and AI automation?
I think society is going to change a lot. For some ways for better, for some ways neutrally, for some ways for worse. I think we're going to see a lot more AI agents hitting B2C in the coming years. The money right now is in enterprise. Not to say I think there's a much higher willingness to pay in B2C than previous technologies. We see that in these school communities, people have a willingness to pay of like $80-$90 a month right now to learn AI, for example. So I think that would also extend to AI tools. But so much of your day-to-day is, I just had a lunch with someone, and, we were doing that game of figuring out when to meet. If there's a trusted AI agent that can do that well and represent your interests on low-level, low-stakes things like that, I think a lot of us will be opting for that. And then so I think that extends to business as well. There's a lot of your business day that is these kind of lower level tasks that you can't really avoid, but they might not require your the full weight of your humanity to do. So I think we're going to see that in those a lot. Specifically, industries, I think in customer service, we're going to see this a lot. We're seeing some studies and we're seeing from some of our customers, folks know that AI is replying. Folks know that the answer might not always be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And on average, they're very happy that they're getting an answer in 1 minute versus 3 to 5 business days. So I think we'll see a trend in where there's interaction where you have to write with humans and you didn't necessarily want to write with humans, you just wanted the solution or the answer. We'll see more there. Because obviously there's some discourse that we do for enjoyment and stuff. I really hope that we're not going to have, AI agents talking with our friends. But yeah, those are some of the things that I could see there. I think there was also a second part to that question.
Just in general, how the job description of a person, specific persona might change in the future, such as the secretary.
Sure.
I mean, there's always this famous sentence that you might heard of, Max, which is like, not an engineer or not a secretary will substitute you, but someone using AI will.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So basically, there's the synergy between AI, the machine, and the human, or the human in the loop that makes it powerful, not the AI alone.
When we were talking about, it comes back to this probabilistic curve again. If that AI, let's say it's getting to 99%, right? But let's say that's 99 times 10 steps. So it's going to work 90% of the time. I think the human's job at a high level will revolve around identifying, mitigating, and making sure that 10% doesn't happen or that it, gets reverted to a success case. So I think for a secretary, that might look like in the medium term, like 1 to a couple years, that might look like, hey, look, here's what I'm about to do. Do you agree? And the secretary there, I think the real benefit of that secretary might be, no, you shouldn't buy this gift. They're actually allergic to peanuts, and remember that little human tidbit or something like that. And then the AI agent picks the perfect gift for that executive client. And they go, great, ship it. And obviously the rest then happens with AI, the coordinating address and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really for a lot of roles, it's going to be someone that can competently monitor the AI, understand when it's doing well, and understand how to efficiently give that couple percent to get it to a success case.
Mm-hmm. Great. Excellent, Max. Coming towards the end of the show, I've prepared a couple of rapid fire questions for you that hopefully you will answer. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer, but yeah. Favorite AI tool or platform, except n8n, of course.
Oh, I'm glad you said except n8n. That would be Cursor. I haven't tried Lovable yet. I've tried Bolt. I love Cursor because it puts me in control, and I love their app mentioning context and stuff. I think they did an amazing UX around that. Anyone working on app mentioning context and copilots, go check out Cursor as an inspiration.
Yeah, definitely a great tool. Most underrated aspect of AI automation?
Most underrated aspect of AI automation is you don't need an AI agent for a lot of AI value. Don't use one if you don't need it. There's a ton of AI steps, text classification, basic chains, various things that could do that job a lot more reliably, especially if you need structured output. So I think the most underrated part of a lot of this AI stuff is there's this super fancy shiny thing that we're building that is ready in some ways and almost ready for certain prod ways, is exciting and is powerful. But there's a lot of powerful things today that might not be as shiny that could probably actually be the right tool for the job.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for businesses looking to adopt AI in automation?
Mm-hmm. Start small, break the problem down. If you don't have automation already in your organization, don't start with AI. I hear this from AI automation consultants all the time. Someone comes to them and says, hey, I need an AI package. And they're ethical people. So they go, hey, no, look, you don't need AI. You need a few automations. We do this first, save you X hours. And then we can add AI for this and this and this once we've established some baselines and save you, way more hours. But start small, scope down, and move incrementally because it's about saving time. So it's better to ship something in a day or two and start getting 5% time back and keep that loop because you learn along the way.
Excellent. Yeah. Divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
If you could automate one mundane task in your life forever, what would it be?
Yeah. So this one's particularly relevant because we're having a bit of a glow up at n8n. We're experiencing some hyper growth right now. But it's when I get a DM, and this can be on any channel, Gmail, LinkedIn, if it's intended for someone else or it's a different department, let's say it's partnerships, I don't head up partnerships, it's just get that message to the right person. Get that person to say, yes, I've accepted it, and it is no longer your responsibility. Because the biggest fear to me is, as we're growing, is like, oh my goodness, this thoughtful individual with a great request, it got lost in the messages or something. And so that one, if that could be automated for the rest of time, that would be fantastic. Because there's so much time lost to like humans saying, hey, would you mind taking this? Yes. And you don't have defined processes for doing that. So you lose a lot of time. And that's something I plan to, hopefully in this quarter still, to automate.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. What is the weirdest thing you've ever automated?
Okay, I have an awesome use case I heard of that I'm going to take an executive decision to share instead because it's truly awesome. So we had a colleague of ours and his ISP, his internet service provider, actually had a clause. A lot of ISPs have this. So check your ISP, where if you had a screenshot of a speed test that was less than 50% of your advertised rate, you got a 50% reduction on your bill. So this was even pre-AI. He was pinging a speed detector from a very simple locally hosted n8n workflow. Basically, almost once a day, it would be under 50. He would send a message to support. And I think the last time I heard from him, he hasn't paid full rate for about 2 years for internet.
I think that's funny.
Yeah.
Really cool use case. What's the funniest misconception people have about AI?
That it's thinking, that it's alive. There's a lot of human psychology around how we'll superimpose, we'll personify things. But it is a neural net. And obviously people way smarter than me could explain at a deep level, but it's, you're inputting tokens and it's predicting output tokens. It's not thinking. And it's not alive and it's not human, at least not today. I think it'd be kind of, that's a whole different meaning we could have about AIs being alive. But yeah, it's a function.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk in 2 years. Let's see what the status quo is then. If you could have a robot assistant for life, Max, what would you make it do?
Yeah, I think cleaning.
Yeah, same for me.
And I think wrapping gifts as well. Really crap at that. But it's funny. I could tell you such a long list of the stuff I wouldn't have it do. Like I'm a music producer and DJ, and I see a lot of these AI plugins for music. And it's funny, the comments on Instagram on these ads will always be, please automate my invoices. Please automate this. Like I barely find time in my week to do this joyous thing. I don't need it automated.
Yeah, super cool. Max, thank you so much for this very short but super interesting podcast. I certainly learned a lot. Is there anything else we missed? Maybe the last words go to you.
Well, firstly, Yusuf, I want to say a big thank you. Some great questions. And it's always fun to reflect on this journey and to share the good word. I would say for my boss, Luis Guzman, I would be remiss to not say that if you are looking to check out n8n, you can self-host n8n, but you can also use n8n Cloud. If you choose to use n8n Cloud, you can use max 50 for 50% off n8n Cloud for a year after your free trial. Sorry for the shameless plug there, but I got to look out for my boss, Luis.
Yeah, definitely. I will put the code in the description for the discount.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot, Max.
Thanks a lot, Yusuf. I really appreciate you having me on the show.